Good morning, and welcome to Naviant CST's webinar on workflow tips and tricks. The workflow module is an electronic document routing system that processes work more efficiently. Sorry about that. I was told I had some audio issues here. Let's start from the beginning here. So the workflow module is an electronic document routing system that processes work more efficiently, quickly, and accurately than traditional paper processing. Workflow streamlines business processes and is designed to accommodate change quickly. Documents can enter workflow in a variety of ways, including input processors like cold, dip, document imaging, and PCL. Documents may be also imported into workflow processes manually or via an electronic form completed over the internet. Configurable rules and actions ensure that documents are distributed in a standard controlled manner that allows business rules and practices to be followed. Workflow has the ability to prompt users for input or automatically process documents based on information such as a keyword, document handle, or document type, assigning specific users with rights to modify a document's movement on an ad hoc basis accommodates exceptions in a configured model. Timers can be employed on queues to make sure documents continue through the process efficiently. Troubleshooting and queue logging tools allow for error-free, secure configurations. And configured workflows can be exported to disk for backup and recovery purposes or for distribution into another OnBase system. Just a few administrative notes before we get started today. You'll be muted throughout the presentation, but please feel free to send us any comments or questions during the presentation, and we'll review them together at the end of the show. And please complete the survey at the conclusion, and as always, record each webinar for future reference. So if you find today's presentation helpful, you can visit the link here to watch it again or show your friends. For those of you who haven't met us yet, here's a quick snapshot of the team. Please join me in welcoming our two newest members to the crew, Jamie Hofer and Brianna Overkamp. My name is James Sondak, and I'm going to guide you through the wonderful world of workflows. Today, we're going to discuss the following topics. We're going to examine the main causes of an underperforming workflow. Next, we'll discuss some of the best practices to make sure your workflow is designed for optimal performance. And rather than hopping over to our virtual machine after every slide, I've compiled all of the best practices and advanced workflow features that we'll dive into at the end. So I'm sure everybody here has dealt with a troublesome workflow at one point or another. Maybe your users have complained to you, or you yourself have been cursing whoever created your problematic workflow in the first place. I could list off a few dozen reasons why workflows might cause some headaches, but there's too many to fit on all one slide, and they essentially boil down to one main reason: poor discovery. A poor discovery will always lead to a poor workflow. Garbage in returns garbage out. This is the single biggest reason that a workflow might fall apart. It's impossible to make an optimal workflow if you're going in blind, but we'll dive into discovery a little bit later. Another main reason workflows may suffer is time. As your workflow evolves and changes over time, it can start to degrade. Without proper planning, your workflow may suffer if your organization expands. If your workflow was designed for one person, but now it's used by 10, that could absolutely cause an adverse effect. If you're processing at a deficit that is adding more documents faster than your workflow can process, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you must design your workflow for the anticipated volume. If the number of documents coming in increases substantially, that could throw a wrench into the gears. And when you're processing at a deficit, you're going to have errors in the outcome. Maybe your organization expands and different departments or offices are adding slight changes to the workflow. You didn't track for those types of errors, and there's no notifications to alert anybody of the mistakes. So now you're going back in and you're doing a lot more manually. As the workflow grows out of control, users might come up with their own weird little workarounds. First we click here to take it onto the workflow, and then we add a keyword here to, add it back in. And it's kind of messy, and it's a lot of additional manual processes that the workflow wasn't necessarily designed for. All of these combined creates a very real lack of visibility. Maybe you didn't design a reporting dashboard, or if we did, we didn't account for the amount of errors that we aren't aware of. So now we're just losing that overall visibility, and that puts us in a real bad situation because now we don't know what we don't know. We can't change it because we don't know it, and we can't modify it to go back and redesign. We have to start from scratch basically, and that can be expensive, so we just kind of throw on some band-aids and keep it running. It might not be perfect, but at at least it works. And as time marches forward, users come and go. Sometimes there might be some knowledge loss with that. As new users come in, they might be trained poorly, or maybe some of them are just flat out using the solution wrong. If you have an older workflow solution, there could be an inaccurate, incomplete, or dated workflow knowledge. It might be worth the time and effort to review and verify your workflows to ensure they are functioning at peak optimization. So now that we know what makes workflows perform a little poorly, how do we avoid it? Let's discuss some ways to enhance our workflows. These are some of the best practice recommendations from a team of OnBase experts. They represent the accumulation of years of experience installing and configuring OnBase solutions. The following recommendations are general in nature, but they're applicable to most OnBase solutions. Depending on your organization's design and needs, not all of the best practice recommendations may apply to your solution. You might want to carefully consider the impact of making any changes to your workflows prior to implementing them into a production environment. So let's start off with the initial design. I cannot stress this enough. Discovery is your single most important piece when designing a workflow. You'll want to learn as much as you can about the process before even beginning to draft up your design. Talk to your users, get to know them. You need to know their wants and needs. Set up a meeting, bring them coffee and donuts, set up another meeting after that. A workflow is only as good as its discovery. You could create, the best design workflow in the world, but if it isn't what your users want, they're never going to use it. I could honestly do an entire webinar about how important discovery is. When you're using an import processor to import documents, add the documents to a lifecycle that does not have system work or load balancing work configured in the initial queue. If an ad hoc task does not require any type of user input or user response, and it's performing a heavy workload, consider offloading that to a queue with a timer. There's no sense in creating unnecessary work for your users if you don't have to. If there's a series of rules that determine which action to take on the document, the most probable logic should be evaluated first. This prevents unnecessary work from being performed on every document exposed to that logic. Determining the most probable path can be accomplished by working with the business process owner or running reports at a later time. In the context of a business process, there are many logic structures that should stop processing when certain conditions are met. There are two methods to break processing, the break processing action and the break on functionality, which exists as part of every task list configuration. You might want to consider breaking a potentially high volume queue into multiple queues. By breaking a high volume queue into 2 or more queues, there will be better and avoid a full database scan. You'll want to make sure you use nesting 3 levels deep or less when configuring actions and rules. This affects memory consumption and ease of maintenance. You will really want to avoid nesting if at all possible. So this is kind of a bad nesting I have here. It's kind of going through, and it's a lot of, is it assigned to Tom? Well, if not, then is it assigned to Jerry? And if not, it's going to keep going down, but it's kind of messy and hard to see. Whereas if we have everything all in the same line, it's a little bit easier. Everything is a lot more clear and concise, and it's just a lot easier to troubleshoot and modify and just really know what's going on. There you go. And documenting your workflow is essential for future success. As your organization grows and expands, new users will need to know how to use your workflows. Let's say you win the lottery and leave the company. Without proper documentation, using and troubleshooting your workflow will be difficult. Make sure you document the solution effectively and ensure that the documentation is up to date and made available to the organization. You want to use the edit comments option to include useful notes and record change information. And creating naming conventions for queues is vital. Use prefixes when naming queues and ensure that a standard format is used across the board. A consistent naming convention will help immensely when you're trying to troubleshoot or modify your workflow later down the line. And try to design your workflow around user groups or roles. You want to avoid using individual users, as some of your key employees and coworkers might move on to bigger and better things. It's a lot easier to modify the user group than it is to modify the workflow. And creating help text and configuration helps to document design choices and lifecycle functionality. Deploying an intuitive solution creates an environment that encourages maximum efficiency. Entering help text information at the workflow component level clearly identifies and relates to business purposes of the lifecycle, queue, or ad hoc task. This is really just for your users and user acceptance. I'm going to say this a lot throughout today's presentation. OnBase is a document repository. Workflow is not. Documents should not sit in a single queue within a workflow process for a long period of time. It's preferable to transition items as part of timer work or ad hoc tasks rather than system work or load balancing work. This is particularly true when an item might transition multiple times before reaching its final destination. And you'll want to implement a garbage collection queue. You should always delete keyword values that are no longer needed outside of the workflow. Fewer records in keyword tables improves the query performance. And when a document is deleted from OnBase, it first goes into document maintenance. Document maintenance is similar to the recycling bin, where documents can be recovered if necessary or completely removed from the system. And for this reason, one could still have a high volume queue from a database perspective, even if only a small number of documents are visible in the queue via the client. By purging the documents in document maintenance, the system removes all records associated with the document, and it potentially eliminates high volume queues. You'll want to keep your queue count low. That's kind of self-explanatory. The less documents in a queue, the less work your system has to do. And by default, the refresh queue setting is set to 0, which disables the system from automatically refreshing the queue count and document hit list. This setting is measured in seconds and should be used with extreme caution if enabled. There's a significant amount of work performed when documents are retrieved and document counts are being processed by the system. You'll want to make sure your workflow is designed to break on success or failure to speed up keyword checks. And if a user does not need count of the documents in the queue, check the option to hide the document count. This saves system overhead incurred from calculating the correct number of documents, which can become complex when load balancing and filters are configured. Writing to the workflow log happens whenever a document enters and exits a queue. If this information is not needed, check the box to disable logging at the queue level. During tip and dip processing, add documents to workflow on commit to speed up the process. I can kind of show you some of these real quick. For your import processors here, we'll just do a dip here, document import processor. And make sure everything looks good here. And then under your settings, we'll go to options and advanced, and we're going to add documents to workflow on commit. That'll help speed up some time here and just make life a little bit easier. The configured work folder for displaying related documents should only contain necessary documents. Users often want all possible related documents to display rather than those they most commonly use. And it's easy to overlook this performance overhead because folders are easy to configure and contribute to a rich user experience. If the user wants a large number of documents across many document types to display, consider using either cross-references or the set folder and template action behind an ad hoc task. This way you can toggle the work folder and allow the user to see all of the documents if they so want. And on a similar note, only query for related documents when needed. In most programming contexts, if the software attempts to access a non-existent object, an error is generated. In OnBase Workflow, that object is usually a document. When performing work against a related document, like updating a keyword, for example, there is no need to first check that related document exists, just attempt the update. If the related document does not exist, no work is performed. And you'll want to consider the speed of related document searches. Folder type is the slowest, document type is fast, but document handle is the fastest. Whenever possible, try to use the document handle to search for related documents. The uniqueness of a related document query is extremely important to performance, and searching for related documents by document handle is the most efficient way. It doesn't need to query against the keyword table. You'll want to limit the number of related document searches. When executing multiple rules and actions against a related document, consider using the Use Related Document for Tasks functionality. This functionality will force OnBase to switch focus to the related documents and execute the logic under the true path of the rule. This option exists on any rule checking for the existence of a related document. When using this functionality, the system queries for all related documents rather than querying the same related documents for each rule and action against the related document. And when available, use the Require All Common Keywords Present on Primary Document option. This can prevent unexpected documents from being processed if a lookup keyword is missing from the primary document. You don't want to assign multiple keywords to filter for performance, and when configuring a custom query to be used as a filter, make sure you use document type instead of keyword type. Displaying the filtered document to ensure that this best practice is implemented. The system incurs significant overhead when the calculating document count should only be checked if the user must know the number of documents returned. I apologize for that. By default, this functionality is disabled in addition to retrieving the list of documents. When using filters, limit the number of display and sort columns. The system must perform extensive logic and database processing to display the documents in filtered hit lists. You'll want to limit the scope of the filters to about 2 to 3 columns to minimize the hit on performance. You really want to talk to your users and get to know what they actually need here. And when columns are configured to allow sorting, the system must perform additional logic to determine the sort order. Ensure that the configured display columns are truly what your users are going to need. You'll want to keep filter rules to a minimum, and your filter rules should be quick and responsive. Try to avoid using long-running scripts or any other long-running rules. You want to use workflow properties rather than keywords to store temporary values. Reading and writing keyword values requires database access and is much slower than reading and writing property values, which are stored in memory. Only use keywords for values that you're going to need to persist beyond the end of the current session. Workflow performance can be significantly increased by grouping keyword types into keyword type groups. Please note that thorough analysis and design should be conducted for converting to or creating keyword type groups. Keyword type groups allow OnBase to retrieve necessary information about a document in a quick and efficient manner. To increase the speed of keyword loads, consider changing your keyword type structures to limit the amount of work that it takes to load the keywords for the document. Consider speed of keyword types. Dual table is the slowest, single table is fast, but keyword type group is the fastest. And you'll want to take extra care when creating keywords and associating keywords with the driving document. A large number of keywords on the driving document will directly impact workflow performance if the keywords are not structured properly. If a large number of keywords are required, consider using a keyword type group. If a value needs to be stored for temporary purpose, you should use the property bag as a temporary storage location. Every update or deletion of a keyword value is written back onto the database, whereas property values are less of a drain on resources. You want to limit the number of keyword loads. There are a variety of other variables that can be used to track and evaluate documents in workflow, such as properties, notes, document types. There's all sorts, really. When using document processing modules and entering documents into workflow on commit, using a status keyword on documents can prevent documents from entering the workflow more than once. In the event that a commit process fails and the incomplete commit batch is manually committed, the entire batch is recommitted and some documents may re-enter the workflow. If a status keyword is used, the status keyword determines where in the workflow documents belong. And as a best practice, do not use any special characters and property names. Only alphanumeric characters are supported. Here at Naviant, this is a standard naming convention, and all of our architects will start a property name with, prop and then a valid description. So something similar to prop current date, for example. I'm not really going to dive too deep into scripting today, but as a general rule of thumb, you want to avoid scripting. You'll always use existing functionality and contact Highland Software if a feature that requires scripting is reoccurring. OnBase has a bunch of rich native functionality. Prior to writing a script, ensure that existing functionality cannot already accomplish the task. You don't want to script something that OnBase can already do. Scripting should really only be used as a last resort to accomplish what you want. Load distribution tools are very powerful for optimizing web server performance and larger implementations. A large number of workflow users and workflow logic operating in an insufficiently configured web environment is a significant performance hazard. You want to direct your workflow users to a different website on a different web server. Build the OnBase web server on 2 different machines to allocate processing needs appropriately to distribute the load. While it's possible to use the existing web server as the application server, it's not advised. By pointing the application server to the existing web server, all workflow logic execution is performed by the web server, whether requests are coming from the web client or the OnBase client. And in addition to executing workflow logic, the web server is processing requests from non-workflow users in the web client. Because the combined processing load can be extremely heavy, the application server should be deployed on a separate machine. If there's a system work or ad hoc tasks that are performing intense activities against a document, you should offload the work to a workflow server. This enables the machine that initiated the work to hand off the work and dedicate system resources to those tasks it was designed for. When using a single machine, the OnBase web server should be equipped to handle the combined load of web users and workflow users. Increase the hardware and resources on the machine to ensure maximum performance. You'll want to increase the processing power of your web server, application server, and workflow server. In the web environment, workflow-related and general OnBase processing is performed by the web server. It's essential for the web server to be configured to handle such loads. The application functionality functions very similarly to the web server, except that it's dedicated to handling workflow logic alone and does not also have to provide processing resources for custom queries, foldering, whatever. The application server should be a powerful machine. By increasing the power of the app server, workflow users will be able to process more work more quickly. Workflow servers should be powerful machines to handle all timer work processing. It's recommended to load balance by user group or role rather than individual user. Load balancing by user group reduces bottlenecks and needs less administration. You want to consider using ownership instead of load balancing if you are going to use user-based load balancing. This ensures that individual users have exclusive access to items. And with ownership, there is no administrative overhead in making sure that load balance members are up to date or needing to manually rebalance queues because different users work at different rates. And consider using ownership in conjunction with load balancing to distribute items most efficiently. Load balance by user group or role to deliver items that each user is entitled to perform work on, then use ownership to give each user exclusive access to the particular items they're actively working on. When matching keyword to username, delete the keyword value from the document as it exits workflow. When the document exits workflow, delete any keyword value that was used for load balancing purpose. Deleting the keyword value helps manage the size of the keyword table and thus controls performance over time. If deleting the keyword value is not an option, as it must remain on the document for reporting or retrieval purposes, consider purging documents and document maintenance. And it's recommended that actions that require user interaction are not used as load balancing work. I wanted to spend a little bit of time today on workflow timers. Workflow timers are a series of rules and actions against items within a queue. Unlike system work, which are first and automatic, or ad hoc tasks which a user needs to interact with, workflow timers execute on a schedule that you configure. So why would we want to use these? Well, they're reliable and do not require any user action. The timers can execute work on multiple items simultaneously. These are perfect for long-running tasks or resource-intensive tasks, which you can perform off hours without any disruption to your productivity. And last but not least, workflow timers are parallel processing, which means they can run multiple timers on the same machine or multiple machines all at the same time. So you may be wondering, what about system work? And let's be clear here, system work doesn't mean work that is done by the system. That's kind of the whole point of workflows. System work, it just simply means that it's automatically executed when an item enters a queue. If system work is complex, resource intensive, or long-running process, you should replace it with timer work. You want to minimize the system work, otherwise import queues can become a bottleneck. Timer work is more scalable. System work may be fine initially, but what happens when your import volume increases or your system work actions and rules increase in number or complexity? If you set your system work behind timers instead, you can easily manage and modify as your solution grows and expands. Initial queues should be configured to run all system work behind a timer in most scenarios. This ensures that all import processes are separated from workflow logic, enables the import machine to perform at a higher level. And you don't want to let your document sit in a timer queue indefinitely. When the timer executes, the document should leave the queue in most cases. Remember, OnBase is a document repository, workflow is not. If timers are configured for a queue that is going to be deleted, it's recommended to make sure that timers associated with the queue to be deleted are removed from the workflow system monitor in OnBase client or the workflow timer service monitor, depending on which method you use for monitor timers. And if you're using an every or after timer, consider using a timer execution window to limit when the timer will actually fire. For instance, if the timer only needs to run during business hours, configure an execution window from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. This frees up your database capacity for those processes that you may already be running overnight, like your import processes or third-party updates, whatever you might have going on. So you want to use the at certain time timer versus every 1 day or 24 hours timer. When the workflow server is restarted, every timers, they'll be reset and the countdown will start from whenever that happens. So this could be 1 day or 24 hours, but if at a certain time timer is used, when the workflow server is restarted, it's not affected. You want to configure every timer intervals with care. When configuring every timer, take note of how frequently the timer needs to fire. You don't want to have the timer fire every 5 minutes if the business process that you're using takes 1 hour. And the main point to consider with an after timer is that an after timer configured after 10 minutes is actually polling every 1 minute. Even though the system is polling regularly, it only executes the defined tasks under the timer when the documents are returned. It's basically checking every single document every single minute, asking, hey, how long have you been here? Has it been 10 minutes? Nope. Okay, well, I guess I'll be back in a minute. So there's really very few business cases that require an after timer. And if you're using an after timer, you should consider using an entry queue keyword and a at certain time timer or every timer instead. So now that we've gone over some of the main reasons for poor workflows and how to avoid them in the future, let's switch gears a bit and discuss some of the more advanced features of workflows. We now know why workflow timers are so vital to a successful workflow. Let's dive into converting legacy timers to Unity schedule timers. The Unity scheduler was introduced in OnBase 16, and it was designed to allow work tasks to be scheduled and executed automatically without human intervention. I don't want to get too much into the Unity scheduler today because it's a very robust system that can schedule all sorts of tasks, but let's focus on the workflow timers. So prior to the introduction of the Unity scheduler, workflow timers were executed by the workflow timer service. In OnBase 16 and 17, workflow timers can be executed either by OnBase Workflow Timer Service or the Unity scheduler. But in OnBase 18, the workflow timer service is removed, so workflow timers in OnBase 18 and above must be executed by the Unity scheduler. This means that any and all existing workflow timers previously using the workflow timer service will need to be converted to use the Unity scheduler. Fortunately, OnBase Studio includes tools to assist in the conversion process. So now that we're in Studio here, I want to dive into a few of my favorite options here. I honestly think that these should be default by choice, but I don't know, maybe I'll submit a SCR, an idea on Highland Community. So one thing I really like is this display action rule event type name checkbox. This will basically just show you what everything does and what's going on. It just makes seeing things a lot easier. And another thing I like is this underline repository tree items. It'll basically just give you a little squiggle if anything's wrong and something that might need your attention. So we'll close on here and let's dive into some timers. I've created 3 of them here for you. We have an after timer, an at timer, and an every timer. So with the legacy timers, you basically just configure everything right in this properties pane. We can go ahead and change this one hour to 1 day. But since this is an at timer, since this is the after timer, basically it's going to check, every single minute, every document that's in this queue. Hey, has it been 1 day yet? Hey, has it been 1 day yet? This isn't really efficient, so we could probably change that if we wanted to. But let's take a look at the at timer here. It's set to at every day at 2 a.m. You could really use an every timer here, but like I said before, if there's any sort of downtime or if the server gets rebooted, this every 3 days timer, that'll get reset to whenever it comes back online. So really the at timer, if it's every day at the same time, you should really use those because they're just more reliable. So if I wanted to switch these over to Unity scheduler, I could just press this little drop down and select it here. But that's not really the best practice because there's no task set up for it or anything, and we would have to go into the Unity Management Console. And I don't really feel like doing that right now, so let's just do it from here. We can set this back to a legacy timer. We'll select the workflow tab up in the ribbon. And then if we select this timers option here, we can convert everything we want. We can select them all. We can select 1 or 2, whatever we want. But let's just go through them all here. And before we hit OK, I want to highlight how important this create the Unity scheduler tasks for the converted timers button is. That is a mouthful. You always want to make sure that this is selected here because if you don't, you'll just have to go into Unity Management Console anyway and reconfigure everything, and it kind of defeats the purpose here. There are some situations where you might need to do that, but we're not going to get into that today. So let's just go ahead and click OK here. Yep, we'll save that. That's fine. And one nice thing about this is you get a nice little conversion report. You know, it tells you everything that you just converted, and it was good, we're good to go. It happened pretty quick. So what we can do is we can go into these timers again and make sure that everything looks good. After 1 day in queue, that's fine. And now we've got these scheduler tasks, whereas we would have to create those manually. So let's see here, at 2 a.m. Next time this is going to happen is, 2 a.m. Perfect. And one thing I wanted to point out about that little create the Unity scheduler tasks for the converted timers checkbox, it's done through config. You want to make sure that your user group has rights to that. That is product rights and Unity scheduler. Make sure your user group has that and you should be good to go. So we'll close on that, we'll do that. So if we go to our insurance claim review here, we can see some of our best practices in action. Let's go ahead and expand all here. As you can see, we've got some good help text here. You want to have, the more information, the better. This will definitely help with troubleshooting and, information down the line. So as you can see, our initial queue is nothing but, a timer. That's all that documents come in, it sits for a little bit, and then they kick them out of there. This will really, free up the import processor and make sure that it doesn't get bogged down or anything. Another thing I like to do here is make sure that you have useful icons. These two are just processing queues, so nobody's really going to see these or anything, and it's just nice for the design point of view. That way we know that all these are just processing. So let's kind of walk through this life cycle here. The insurance claims come in, they're going to sit here for a few minutes, and they're going to get sent over to the sorting queue. The sorting queue is basically going to check to see whether this is, is it an auto claim or a home claim. Here at Naviant Insurance, we're expanding into life insurance soon, but I really haven't configured this yet. And this is one thing that I really like about, the little squiggles. It'll tell you, hey, like there's something you need to do here. So it's basically going to check through, is this an auto claim? Going to check the keyword type. Is it auto? If yes, perfect. And this is, an example of use the most probable outcome first. Some of our biggest insurance claims are auto. About 80% of our claims come from accidents. So we want to use this one first because there's no sense in checking every single document if it's a life insurance claim if, it's not. Is it a home claim? Probably not. So basically we have this just sent over to a auto claims queue after it gets sent over. And our auto claims is load balanced. We have it set to users, which isn't necessarily the best practice because, what happens when auto claim worker 1 gets promoted? What happens if he quits? We have to come back in here and modify the workflow, and it's just a lot easier to modify the user group. So what we should do is switch this over to user groups. And then after the load balancing sets it out, we have a property value assigned here. We're going to use this a lot later. We could use it to assign the users. We're going to notify the users. We'll use it in notifications. So what we really want to do is make sure that you have this copy and pasted. I like to keep like a Word document or a notepad. I have all of my properties here, and then a nice little description about what we're doing with that. This is nice because it's not a keyword. It's just it's just a temporary value. So that's going to reduce a lot of the system overhead. And as you can see, we used our standard naming convention, prop and whatever it is. So basically, let's see what we have here. It sends out the notification to the user that they have work that they need to do. So let's take a look and see what that notification looks like. We'll modify that. And here in the subject, you can add all sorts of different tokens, which is really nice because you could pull information directly from the documents or the queue itself. So this one is, if we insert, Q2 is the queue name. So it'll tell you, you've got a new item in auto claims assigned to, and again, this is where we want to copy and paste everything because if you make a typo or anything, it's going to be impossible to figure out what happened, why it's not working. You're going to beat your head against the wall trying to figure it out. and you're just going to be sitting there thinking, ah, man, I really wish that I would have listened to James during his workflow webinar because now I can't get this. So make sure you always copy and paste these instead of trying to type them out yourself. And another nice thing about these is that you can format them. You know, capitalize will capitalize the first word in the sentence there. Capitalize words will capitalize every word. And then uppercase and lowercase are kind of self-explanatory because it'll all be lowercase or all be uppercase. And as you can see here in the property, there's no drop down or anything. So you know, having a Word document or any sort of notepad, excuse me, will allow you to just, you know, easily find what you need. So we've got our notification all set up. Dear, you know, the assigned user, there's an item that needs your attention, and you know, this looks fine. We know what we need to do. We could probably make this better, but you know, it's not great. It's not terrible. But let's move on to the recipients. And again, we used our property here. So this is where it really comes important. I'm going to say it again. You want to copy and paste these. And then we also have this sent out to, you know, our manager, Paul Kegler. That way he knows that, you know, whoever has some work to do has some work to do. So let's dive into the fun stuff here with some ad hoc user tasks. This is like the biggest key for user acceptance. And, you know, I like these helpful little icons. We've got a big red X for deny and a green arrow for approve. So it makes the users, you know, the little details like that. So I added a couple different like pop-up boxes for the users just to, you know, get them to interact a little bit more. Like, did you verify all this information? So we can click yes or no. Cancel is an option, but I like to hide that because I want to make sure that my users are doing their job. So from there, they can either, you know, approve it or deny it. And if they, you know, select yes on that, they did verify all of the insurance things. It's going to send out, you know, notification to the customer saying that your claim has been denied. And after that, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. OnBase is a document repository. Workflow is not. You want to make sure that these documents aren't just sitting here forever taking up valuable real estate. So when you're done here, you know, you want to make sure that this exits the workflow. But, you know, let's check this out in the Unity client. One thing that's really nice is the item generators, which will allow you to kind of, you know, test out your workflow here. So we'll just do some auto claim here. You know, make sure you give it a good name and a description. The more information you have, the better it'll be. And we're going to select some documents here. And you want to make sure that you select the right document type, and we'll just do 5 of those. We'll specify some text. I like to make sure that test is in big, bold letters just to make sure that it stands out from the rest of them. Next. And what I really like is that you can add these keywords here, and you can really add a lot of different information. You know, like for the policy number, you know, you can set different currency formats, constant values. There's all sorts of different options in the keyword configuration, and this just really helps test out your design. We'll cancel that out. We'll select next. And, you know, we want to add this to the specified lifecycle, so that way we can test this out. Next. We'll just use today's current date. Next again, and we'll go ahead and select finish. So from here, we'll just select execute. We'll save that. And let's hop into OnBase. Insurance claims. Let's see here. Let's check on our initial queue. Looks like we have a handful. 1039. That looks good to me. Let's go ahead and, you know, submit our timer work, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to sit here for 10 minutes waiting for that. We'll route those out. And auto claims 4, that shouldn't be there. We've got, you know, nothing there. That's because we're signed in as manager, and we want to see, you know, the other users inbox. We'll select all of these, select OK. And there we all go. We can see that, you know, it's 1, 2, 1, 3, 2. The load balancer is working. It's balancing out all of the information here. And so basically all of our users are gonna, you know, do their work. They're gonna review their claims here, and we can either, you know, approve it or deny it. I've added the helpful, you know, text here to tell you what this button does. You know, by selecting this button, the claim will be denied, and a denial notification will be sent to the insured's email address. I've also set this up to use a shortcut, a little hotkey for the users, which just, you know, might make their life a little bit easier, which we can configure here. All you need to do is right here in the properties pane, down here in shortcut, you'll select configure, and then you'll need a modifier and a key. Your modifier is going to be either Control, Alt, or Shift. Shift can't be used by itself, but you can combine it with Control or Alt. So if you want to do like Control Shift D or Alt Shift D, that's fine. So we'll cancel out there, and let's run through this again. So I'm just going to hit, let's deny this claim here. Control D. Did you verify all of this insurance specific things? No, I didn't. We've got another little pop-up here, hey, go do your job. So I've got to go verify this again. Oh, I've verified all my information down here, and this time I'm going to deny it for real. And it'll kick it onto the life cycle. So another thing here is like I've set a custom query as a filter here, which is really nice because maybe your users might need more or less information. So in order to do that, just set up a custom query. And under settings, you need to make sure that it's by document type. You don't want to use keywords. And you want to check this little box for workflow filter. You'll assign it to whatever workflow queue you want to assign it to. And as your display columns, you want to try to limit this. Make sure your users have what they need, but the more you have, the more resources it'll require. And you set your retrieval keywords. You want to try to use as few as possible, again, because the less work your system has to do, the faster it'll go. So we'll close on it there, we'll close on it there, and then you need to assign it to the specific queue. So auto claims and filters, workflow webinar. We can set the default filter as well. So like as you notice, like this just showed up right when I opened it. If I wanted to go ahead and open a different filter, if we had others to select from, you'd do that there, or just go ahead and select none, and that doesn't really do us much good there. So I kind of wanted to expand a little bit on the properties and expressions, and in order for that, let's check out our other queue we have here. I'll just go ahead and close this and expand this. So as you can see, we start off with more timer work. It's just as a best practice. We want to make sure you try to do that whenever possible. And so we want to basically set a property for when this application was submitted. So what we want to do is, when you select this accept application button, by selecting this button, a policy will be assigned and a renewal date will be set. So here's where we have more properties. Prop application submit date. We're going to use current date and time. Prop application submit date. You want to make sure you copy and paste those, because I swear it's going to happen. You're going to make a typo and you're not going to be able to find it, and it's going to be a pain. So we want to set this as a keyword from the property. And I know you're probably thinking, but James, earlier you told us that we don't want to use keywords. Well, sometimes you might have to. If we need to look this up in the future by the policy start date, well, that's totally fine. So what we do here is we set the keyword from the prop application submit date, which we just created. And then from here, we can add the expression. You can start to type everything out right in here, but it's generally recommended to use the test feature just because it makes life a lot easier. So what we can do here is the show list option. It'll tell you all the keywords and the functions you have. And it's really nice because like if you highlight over it, it'll tell you the exact syntax and what it does. So it's like add minutes, you got to open parentheses and then a space, you put in the date, semicolon, minutes, and you're good to go. So what's really nice is that you can kind of test over everything. And also the MRG will go into further detail about, what all of these do and how to use them. But for now, let's just stick with the add date. So in order to test this out, you select variable has a value. We'll put in today's date, 9/18/2019, and we'll select set. From here, we can kind of test it out, and it should give us back 9/17/2020. That is 365 days. So we'll go ahead and close on it there, and let's check it out. We'll use our item generators again to create some sample documents. I'm not going to go through how to configure it again. It's pretty similar, just next, next, next. We'll execute that. And let's check it out in OnBase. We've got our initial queue here. We'll execute our timer work. And so we've got a few documents in here. As you can see, there's no renewal date, there's no policy start date. So let's see what happens when we hit this accept application. Puts in today's date, puts in a year from now. Now, this is just like a real basic overview of what kind of, expressions and functions and features you can use here. But I just kind of wanted to touch base and show you what all sorts of stuff you can do with these expressions. It's really, really powerful. And one last thing I wanted to show you before we get out of here today is documentation. I've said how important documentation is, and there's actually a really fun feature in here, right? Through just create documentation. We'll do a user guide. We'll select next. You can add all of the different life cycles you want to add to this in case you have, a whole bunch in the same, or if you want to create multiples, that's totally fine. Let's select next. We can name this. It would help if I could type. Insurance claims. We'll select next, and we'll save this just into documents. Finish that. And as you can see here, it gives you a nice little overview about, what OnBase is, the workflow, what it is. This is more for, your users and everything. And then here it'll show you, like all of your information. This comes straight from, your documentation and your workflow that you have here. So when you have, your different queues, you want to have, it would help if I could type. Everything is, that you need there, it'll show up in here. So this is just a real helpful way to, make a nice little documentation for your users and anyone working in the future that's trying to troubleshoot or modify your workflows after you move on to bigger and better things. And they're sitting there wondering, oh man, I wish I knew what I was doing here. So with that, are there any questions? Okay, well, it doesn't look like anybody's asking anything, but please feel free to reach out to support@navient.com if you would like any further information or documentation about workflows. We'd be happy to help. And if you'd like a copy of this presentation or any other previous content that we've put out, please visit navient.com within the resource library. We encourage you to join us for our next webinar on October 9th, where we discuss OnBase Workview 201. You can expect to learn and see plenty of helpful tips and tricks and information in this webinar. One highlight of this presentation will be teaching you how the layout of your tables, attributes, and relationship using ACE format. Additionally, you'll learn how to make your first application a success by building filters, views, and more. And of course, we hope you'll join us at our annual summit next month to learn how every department in your organization can work better, smarter, and faster with OnBase. From the newest users to a seasoned executive, this event is truly for everyone. If you're on the fence about attending, simply have a conversation with someone who has been there before, and I'm confident you'll be eager to attend this year. And with that, thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you next time.